let's start with the title question. Oh, and there's Brent. How you doing, Brent? Hey, we're a little bit delayed, so you'll wave in a couple of seconds. All right. So let's start with the title question. Chips and wafers, they've really changed the medical device industry. I remember when I first started, medical devices were mostly electromechanical in nature, and as a mechanical engineer, that was really warm to my heart. But very soon, it became much more about the technology, the chips that were inside it. What do you see that this electronic digitization of medical devices is allowing us to do tomorrow that we couldn't do yesterday?
So I think really three
areas. One is processing power. The second one is storage, and the third is connectivity. So you think about Internet of Things, cloud connectivity, which allows the medical infrastructure to be distributed, whether it be to home care, out of to doctors' offices, etc. Processing power, obviously, you can do things like advanced image processing that you couldn't do in the past in small single-use devices. And then storage, obviously, if you're collecting clinical data, you need a lot of storage to drive AI or machine learning, et cetera. So those are the big changes I think we've seen in the last 5 years.
And just to, go ahead.
I'm not sure if I can add too much, but one of the key trends is ultra miniaturization. So for example, we're the leading producer of pacemakers, among other things, at Medtronic. And we've gone from pacemakers the size of a hockey puck to now they're the size of a little capsule, and continue to get smaller. The other thing is just surgical intervention is also migrating from the sort of open surgery where you have an open chest or open back or whatever, into minimal incisions. And then that is also inviting the use of robotics and also on the back end, machine learning that allows surgeons to learn from their past cases, etc. But I also concur about data. Another area is sensors, of course. So a lot of remote patient monitoring, but also our devices are smart devices. So they can store and transmit and also make decisions. So there's a huge, market for electronics in medical devices.
Well, Brent, we'll go over to you. Give us your opinion on how silicon and chips have really changed the game when it comes to medical devices and the industry as a whole.
We'll go over to you.
I was waiting for the mute button. Just one really quick thing to add on the end of the comment around sensors is the idea.
I was waiting for the mute button. Just one really quick thing to add on the end of the comment around sensors is the idea. I was waiting for the mute button. Just one really.
Seems to be looping and it's way behind what I'm talking. So it's a little bit confusing on my part. Sensors and the idea that you have end-to-end connectivity from the patient all the way back to the supplier of raw material in, and then that vertical connection of information, from the cloud all the way down to the equipment itself. And then that data allows some of these interventional surgical equipment to get smarter and smarter as they go, so they can learn from what they've done in the past and retain that learning, where a surgeon itself is having a limited amount of data storage in the brain itself compared to on system.
Activity. Why is it so important for those in the room that may be in this space and working in device? Why is it important to think about the data that's collected from these devices, or to even collect it in the first place? Neil, you got the mic?
Well, I think one of the most important trends in healthcare delivery is the integration of care, is the idea that the patient's data follows them from sort of their first visit through interventions to back to home. And there are a number of players now that are working on developing sort of integrated platforms that collect and retain data about the patient through the whole journey.
I think we saw in COVID, certainly there was a lot of distance medicine occurring. And you think about it, if you're in a doctor's office or in a hospital setting, the practitioner is taking a history, et cetera. If you're distributed and you've got a device collecting data, that is data that needs to get to the healthcare practitioner. So, and if you think about a chart in a hospital, the nurse comes by however frequently, or the doctor, and they're making entries onto a chart. So think about that data now being collected in a home care setting. And so you could have depending on how many data parameters are being collected by a device, you could have a wealth of data and that needs to be collected. And then obviously you've got the issues around encryption and the ability to share data and privacy that is ever looming in our society today. So with all of that, there's a lot of data storage requirement that could be on device that is required.
And the exciting part about this data is it actually can lead to faster improvement in healthcare, both for the practitioner as well as for patients. So I want to ask a question around patients. What role do medical devices play in improving the patient's experience with the healthcare system?
Well, I guess there are different devices, some of which just transmit back to the doctor or the medical team, but there are others that actually give the patient their own data, which I think is a trend. A good example would be insulin pumps and continuous blood sugar measurement, because the patient can actually annotate them themselves. When did they have a meal? When did they exercise? When did they sleep? But they can also, over time, they can change their own behaviors based on, what their blood sugar does, and anticipating, when they might need a dose of insulin.
Just trying to think without having half an hour answers. How do you make a quick answer to something? I think interaction between devices and patients is definitely increasing and coming. And I think a common user interface is very key as you think about an aging population. What is their interaction with technology been? Maybe they know how to use a Windows computer, maybe they know how to use their smartphone, maybe a Mac device, et cetera. So I think one of the challenges is being able to deliver either the instructions or the control of the devices in a common interface. And that's really what will make a device compliance, I guess, is really a key thing, because it's like anything. If your children are unsupervised, you never know what they're doing, right? And not that I want to suggest that older patients or even middle-aged patients are behaving like children, but compliance is important. You think about it, you don't take your meds, you're not going to get the outcome and the result that you want. So
I will admit I was like a 10-year-old when I got one of those talking scales, because I stepped on it, had it speak, stepped off, stepped back on again, just trying to make it see, and then put weights on it to see if it can make it say different things. Anyway, so you're not wrong that we're still kind of immature when it comes to new technologies. But I'm curious, Brent, hopefully we got you back. What's your opinion in terms of the role that medical devices play or don't play in improving the overall patient experience?
I'll go back to what Neil said about the insulin pump. I think it's a great example of where it provides the patient real-time insight into their current state. If you expand that, further into what we see today with smart devices on your wrist, smart devices integrated into your clothing, smart devices into your home, you have this wealth of information that can circulate back to you and give you indications like you're low on electrolytes, maybe have an energy drink or a sports beverage. We're picking up a palpitation in your heart. Maybe it's a great idea to go in and see your physician. So I think that's the future. And obviously with that, you're going to need smarter and smarter devices. And that's where that clean integration is from the silicon side, the die chip side. and then that connectivity to the patients itself, giving them real-time feedback so that they can judge and address their health real time.
A new disease now, it's Apple Watch disease. And it's when your Apple Watch says you have a problem and you go see a doctor and they can't figure out what your problem is because it's just your Apple Watch. But I've had that experience myself, actually. But it is creating more symptoms for doctors to evaluate by having wearables, that's for sure. And some of it is constructive. People get early detection of things like atrial fibrillation, but some of it's not really clinically significant, and it's wasting a lot of time, unfortunately.
And you wonder why Apple is suddenly buying physician practices, because the watches are basically telling you to go to see your physician, and now that they own them, they're making money on both sides. That's just the conspiracy theory, by the way. No, but what I'm hearing the three of you say is that devices are connected, and there is this data side of things, and so it's no longer just about the device itself. It's about the ecosystem that that device plays in. You're going to have to connect this device to some data recipient, and hopefully that's not just your own app. Hopefully it's integrated with the other hospital systems, the other medical systems, so that way the data is not isolated. An insulin pump is great, but it's even better if that can be tied in with my medical record. A surgical tool is great, but it would be even better if it's tied into the OR technology that the hospital is using. Is that sort of something you've seen a lot more companies do in this space, is making sure that this data is more now connected into the larger ecosystem, or is it still very isolated in your mind?
I'll say that it's still pretty isolated, but I think new standards are coming that are going to require, interoperability, connectability. And so I think very soon that'll be the standard of care.
Brent, what are your thoughts on that?
Agree with Neil, right? It's going to be an evolution of standards, an evolution of privacy, but I think that's the direction that we're seeing. It's just going to take quite a bit of time because it's a new frontier for healthcare, and they're still stuck kind of in a lot of cases in old capability, and it'll just take time for the evolution. But I think the information is there, and I think the path has been, laid by other industries.
I think the other thing is software. So whether it be AI or machine learning, one of the things that the regulators are challenged with right now is how do you regulate an evolving medical device? You think about it in traditional terms, the FDA, the company would come and place their device on the table and say, please certify this for use in the market. And it was what it was, and it never changed. And, as a manufacturer, you would have to prove that you could make the same thing every time that they approved. Think now about AI and machine learning. Who knows what the AI and machine learning will, and the algorithms that are driving that will either cause the device to do, or the data that it will collect and share. And how do you regulate that? How do you ensure patient safety? And how do you ensure that you're not, I think there's probably been many, many movies made where the machines take over, and Terminator or whatever. Not that I want to associate that with medical devices, but in general, that's the other issue as you're making a device and deploying software, whether it be AI algorithms, machine learning, what have you. Be prepared that it's a changing landscape. The regulators haven't figured it out yet, and there's some directional device from the EU MDR or the FDA, but that's the other challenge that this industry is going to have in the next 5 years.
It's sort of everyone's going to need healthcare, and the other universal rule is there'll always be regulations regulating healthcare. So we'll never have a shortage of regulations in our industry. Let me switch gears a little bit and ask a question that was asked in a lot of the other panels this morning. What is it going to take in your minds to make Canada a destination for foreign medtech companies to set up shop here, or for our local homegrown medtech companies to be successful internationally? What do we have to do as a society, but more so as an industry here in Canada, to put ourselves on the map?
Sure. Well, I worked on a federal ISED panel. It was called HBEST, which was Economic Strategy Table for Health and Biosciences. And, basically, we had 5 things. I've written them down here. One was Canada needs to adopt new procurement approaches that don't just focus on the lowest price, but really look at providing the value and also providing some incentive to encourage local companies to get into the healthcare system, which they find great difficulty in. Second was just some refinement in the regulatory process. It's very slow. So they came up with this thing called R2D2, which is regulatory reform for drugs and devices. And they're well underway actually in that. The third is just the adoption of digital tools, which Canada and healthcare tends to lag the world, and that's a tremendous opportunity, I think, for Canadian startups. Fourth is talent, and I think we heard earlier today about this, the hardware semiconductor industry. Well, the same thing is also true from a medical technology perspective in Canada. And then lastly is financing, and that's probably something this group also talks about, is there's a tendency to fund the startup, but then when they get to the scale up step, they're underfunded and they typically have to go offshore and may involve even moving offshore. So those are the 5 key sort of steps that we recommended.
So interestingly enough, we usually don't have great things to say about government bureaucracy. The one thing I will say, though, is Canada is uniquely positioned in its free trade scenarios. So as an example, we have free trade with the EU. The US does not. Obviously, we've got the North American free trade situation. We also have free trade and free-flowing goods with Asia-Pac, certain signatories to that. In fact, today I just had a situation with one of our customers. They were doing their R&D in the US, and every time they brought chips in or circuit boards in from Vietnam, they had a massive problem in customs in the US. And bringing those same boards here into Canada because of the free trade agreement was no issue whatsoever. So they would expect a week in customs in the US, and here it was sort of the courier companies called up and said, we have this, what's the H code? And the next day we have the product. So my point there is that we are uniquely positioned to be global manufacturers and distributors of devices that cuts out a lot of the regulatory or trade red tape. And so, I think that's a key thing that we can take advantage of. Second thing that, again, Neil mentioned is talent. We have lots of great engineers. Here in Ontario, we've got tons and tons of automotive engineers because we have a very mature automotive industry, but good luck finding engineers with class 2 and class 3 medical device delivery experience. They're very difficult to find. And most of them are working for like Neil or Brett or other large companies.
Hey, I'm retired.
Yeah. But that's the other thing that if we're going to compete, we need to build that talent pool and talent infrastructure for medical devices. There are a couple of schools that are doing a great job, but a lot of it, I would say, a lot of it is in the research and development side. So lab development work, very little in the manufacturing and delivery side in general in Canada. So, and then the last thing is really the ecosystem and the infrastructure surrounding testing, whether it be material testing, whether it be, again, we're pretty good in electronics testing, again, driven by the automotive industry, but you get into materials testing for biocompatibility, et cetera, you're probably not going to find anybody in Canada that has that capacity at a lab level. So you've got to ship your things to the US to get tested. We did ANSI testing for face shields, for the visors of face shields during COVID. And we had to send all of the samples for testing and compliance with ANSI and CSA standards to the US because there was nobody in Canada that could actually perform those tests. And they're pretty simple tests, but that's the other thing that we really need to build here.
Brent, what about you? What can we do to put Canada on the map for medical devices?
I think maybe just really quick to add, based on what the other two have commented on, is bringing it all together. We've seen a lot of success, specifically right here in my backyard in Phoenix, with the culmination of university, industry, and regulatory all together in centers of innovations or sites of innovation. Right, we have one in Phoenix in biosciences that has really started to move the mark forward. It gives the incoming talent an opportunity to interact with industry, understand and learn those key foundational ideas that will be translated into like an opportunity in the future. But it also gives weight within the ecosystem and government of that locale as well, to kind of look at opportunities where the financing piece or the benefits piece can be for that long-term strategy of evolving into commercial manufacturing.
If I could just add one more thing, one of the key assets that Canada has, I feel, is the medical profession in Canada, and our tertiary care system is highly concentrated in Canada in large academic centers, and so they love to do research, and they definitely punch above their weight in terms of New England Journal, Lancet type publications. And so that's one of the things that we in Canada have done, is we've really bulked up on our research, because we find a lot of great original ideas come from Canada, actually. In fact, the original pacemaker was developed in Canada. I mean, insulin was discovered here. That's a million years ago. But still, the creativity of the medical profession is excellent. And so I think the opportunity to work with them, if you have the ability to exploit the ideas and create products and business, is just excellent.
No, I 100% agree with you. We have a lot of companies and really innovative ideas that happen and start here in Canada. The joke in other jurisdictions outside of Canada is that Canada is a land of medical pilots, because we love to do pilots, we love to do testing and trials here in Canada. But it's that next step that we haven't really mastered in terms of turning those pilots into paid opportunities. Part of that is because of the way our healthcare system is funded. But also it is because we just don't have the infrastructure today in terms of investors, in terms of people like yourselves and expertise. And that's why a lot of companies unfortunately have to go to the US first, make a go of it there, and then come back to Canada, right? And hopefully in doing so, they stay in Canada. And I think that's a challenge for us, is that, if I'm going to do most of my business in the US, why don't I just relocate there? It's so easy to do that. And that's where a lot of our talent ends up going. So I definitely think Canada can do a better job on that second stage, because the idea side, we're okay. We punch above our weight in Canada. As you guys look, we're getting close to the end of 2022 here. As you folks look at 2023 and beyond, what are the trends in medical devices that you're keeping your eye on, and that you would like our audience to keep their eye on? Dave, we'll start with you.
So a couple of things. A lot of the large strategics have cut back on their R&D, and they're expecting to buy products into their portfolio from scale-ups and startups, which is actually good news. You just need to get to the point where they're willing to buy your company. So they used to, a lot of the companies used to go out and buy startups, and then they got burned a bunch of times. So now they're probably looking for either taking minority positions in startups with options to go full investment, or they're looking to buy scale-ups. And what's a scale-up? Somebody that's got regulatory approval, somebody that's got enough money to get it to market, and somebody who's got maybe some regional or small distribution to prove that the product's viable in the marketplace. So that's really one, I think, trend that's occurring, is that the strategics are buying more and more, and even up to the mid-sized companies, we see some mega deals happening. The other trend, obviously, is the single-use device marketplace. So we're seeing single-use visualization devices, endoscopes, arthroscopes, laparoscopes, we build a number of those for our customers that are using chipsets, et cetera, and they're inexpensive enough, along with the image sensors, et cetera, they can just throw them away after single use. So we're seeing that. We have other customers that are buying into the Apple ecosystem. They're actually using the gyroscopic capabilities of Apple Watches, talking to an Apple iPhone, talking to an iPad that's sitting at the nursing station. So we're seeing a lot of trends where people are piggybacking on infrastructure that exists, because why reinvent that wheel if that's not what your core function is intended to be. And then the last thing is, as I spoke about earlier, is really AI and machine learning. That's the last, I think, frontier, or at least the next frontier of where we're expecting to see investment.
Yeah, at the risk of maybe repeating some of my earlier comments, one of the things I mentioned is robotics. And, robotics have been sort of a fringe player in surgery, for example, for the last decade or so. But I think what's going to happen is it's going to become really standard of care. And so we're seeing a lot of different specialized, there's the Da Vinci platform, which everyone knows about, which is sort of an all-purpose type of robot. But increasingly, we're seeing highly specialized robots. For example, I think J&J and others have, for hips and knees robots. We have a spine robot, cranial robot, vascular robot, on and on. So I think robot assist, is going to really become the standard of care in the next 10 years. And with that is the opportunity also to integrate learning, machine learning, and artificial intelligence. So I think that's one thing. We talked about the integration of care and how that, you want to have kind of a single data set that will follow the patient, and everything will be sort of compatible, interoperable with that. So I think that's really important. I was just last week at a meeting called the International Consortium for Health Outcomes Measurement, the ICHOM meeting. And basically that means not only the clinical data set, but also the economic, to follow the patient so that you can evaluate the value that's created and the management of the process from an efficiency perspective. So I think we'll see that as well. And then the other thing I mentioned is just the ultra miniaturization of everything, which is so much safer for the patient, less blood loss, less wound infection, and ultimately a quicker surgery, day surgery versus long hospital stay, that sort of thing.
Brent, what are your thoughts? What trends are you keeping your eye on over the next 12 months?
Yeah, I think outside of what was already mentioned, I think personalized care, take the culmination of everything that was discussed and the ability to design a treatment plan that is unique for that individual, and then point of use distribution, right? So think of drug delivery at point of use where it's more effective than just drug delivery orally. I think those two things are aided by all of this technology, and that ability is, somewhere off in the near future.
But I'll ask the last question, and then I'll turn it over to the audience maybe for one or two questions. I'll ask you first, Brent. What separates, in your mind, because you see a lot of companies, what separates a good med tech company from one that isn't quite going to make it, or is just a middling company? What are the characteristics in terms of their product, the people? What is it that you're looking at?
Yeah, great question. I think the first one is ability to differentiate, right? So when they look at a particular disease state and they look at their product, that ability to capture a differentiating feature, which is either aiding in the patient's recovery, the patient's end state, or aiding in the physician itself, the ability to, as pointed out by Neil, do more in a much smaller footprint and much less invasive. And I think the other thing is from an employee mindset, is that ability to really transition into a growth mindset. The world is evolving, just that ability to jump on board with digital transformation and start to utilize technology and techniques that others are utilizing for
All right. Neil, what are your thoughts?
Well, I certainly agree about the differentiated thing. I've seen a lot of Me Too startups, and the market just doesn't need that. So you really need to start with some kind of a breakthrough idea and technology. But I think another thing that's really important is like empathy with the customer and kind of a passion to solve the problem. And I think that can take startups a long way. But then there's the whole sustainability thing. Does the management team have more than just engineering skills? Like, do they have good sales and marketing skills? Do they have good financial skills? They have good sort of connectivity in the healthcare ecosystem.
So a couple of things. We always see a lot of products have difficulty getting to market either through reduced or improper human factor testing. They think they got a great idea, and then as you expose it to a wider audience, all of a sudden you have things that you didn't realize. Now some of them are, one care provider might think that they want their device to be purple, and somebody else wants black or white. Those are things that you can just ignore. But there are other things about medical practitioners are different sizes. So you have the 6'4", 250-pound doctor, and then you have the other, physician who, a female physician who's 5'3" and very slight. So how do you make a device that can be used by either of those folks? Obviously, patients come in different sizes and flavors. So that's part of it. The other thing is also not underestimating the regulatory requirements to get to market. In large organizations, Siemens, Medtronic, et cetera, the Strykers of the world, 3Ms, J&Js, they've got massive regulatory teams, quality engineers, all the ingredients to get things to market. And sometimes they forget that the smaller, less resourced organizations, A, don't even know what they're up against, and B, they don't get to a point where they can actually manufacture their device. So I think if you're, as investors, you need to have that, assure that the entrepreneur has that savvy from a regulatory, and it's not that they have to be regulatory experts, but at least they need to know what they don't know. And there are lots of great folks out there that can help you get your 510K to market and generate your 510K. But you need to know. We've had companies that have decided, should we do an OTC product or should we go class 1 or 2 medical device, right? Even that decision about how you want to go to market and what you're taking to market is something that you really need to know who you are and where you want to be. So that's really what it is. It's, it's great to have a great idea. It's great to build something in the lab that is effective and is good, but how do you make 1 million of them if that's what you got to do, right? So that's the other thing as looking for the ingredients for success.
We got time for one question from the audience. If anyone wants to put up their hand, ask a question of the panel. Otherwise, I'll ask them what their favorite movie is. No? Is there, oh, there. Okay, yeah, go ahead.
So, first thing is really more of a comment, but then there's a question. Oh, cool. Hi. First thing is really more of a comment. A lot of these medical devices, it's really about the user experience itself. And, does it pass the grandmother test? Because, like, my son has a cochlear implant, and even passing around microphones and deploying that in a school is a real big problem. So it's great that we can build all of these technology things, but it's really the deployment is a big thing. The question that I have is really around the research side and how to do that technology transfer. Because, it's really how do you get it out of the lab and into the companies? Because I see that as a real problem.
Good question. So how do we help with the transfer from the lab and the institution into commercialization and commercial success? I want to take a stab at that. Neil, do you want to start?
I can try. I think what someone said earlier is true. Is that at least larger companies like mine was not too interested in just something that's at a very undeveloped stage. We're really looking for evidence that not only is safe and effective, but that the customer, whoever they are very engaged in the product. So I think we tend to be going sort of later in the development phase. So I think the entrepreneur needs to have a certain amount of resilience to get through all these regulatory and testing hurdles along the way. But I guess the other thing is just anticipating where things are going, being a step ahead of the market, and having something that's unique and differentiated.
Brent, any comments on how the tech transfer can happen more effectively?
Yeah, just really quickly, is we have a saying that's intentionality to reality. When you start out, you really have to have an end state in mind. It can't just be a science experiment, right? There's lots of great science experiments, especially within medical device, but you have to really be thinking of the disease state, the patient, and the outcome that you want to. And then again, last piece is bring your operational teams in earlier. So many R&D teams will design things that you just cannot commercially manufacture. So bring them in a little bit earlier and find that balance between the two. And I almost guarantee your success rates will be better.
So so I think doing DFM, so design for manufacturing, design for assembly, and in the world of semiconductors today, design for availability. You don't want to come up with, you went to an electronics store and bought a couple of chips, and then you want to make 100,000 of them, and you find out you can't get 100,000 of them. That kind of kills your device, before it even gets started. But also, I think what Brent said is, you've got to be able to make a lot of them. And that's the other thing. The other thing is I was at a seminar about 6 months ago. And so I have this thing about the do's and don'ts of delivering a medical device. And probably the key one on here is one of the don'ts, and that is don't try to deliver a perfect device out of the gate, because what you think is perfect is probably not perfect. You might get 80% if you get lucky, hit 80% of the requirements and usage, but I think you've got to expect to evolve and iterate. And as you show more folks, whether that be through limited launch or just if you have good medical advisory, folks with you, that's the other thing that can really help you get to market faster. Everybody, perfection is the enemy of good enough, I think is the best way to describe it. So don't try to be perfect.
Great advice. I guess that's kind of the end of our time here up at the panel. The panelists will be sort of available afterwards if you want to come up and ask them questions one-on-one. But thank you, Neil. Thank you, David. Thank you, Brent, for joining us today on this panel.
Thank you very much.
Over to you, Aaron.
Thank you so much, Colin and panelists, for those amazing insights. I definitely have had Apple Watch syndrome, so I appreciated that reference. So we just talked about MedTech, and now we're moving into automotive tech. So we have a panel up now, then we have a break, and we get back into our pitch competition. So I'll introduce our next moderator.
We help innovators innovate. We're a contract manufacturer of medical devices, and we help our customers scale their ideas and commercialize their products. Our multidisciplinary team can help them introduce new materials, new fabrication solutions, and new medtech ideas to global markets. So most contract manufacturers only work in one area of domain knowledge, whether it be plastics, electronics, fabrication. We, on the other hand, help our medical device customers solve their entire production process from end to end, whether it be raw material procurement, manufacturing components, sterilization, lot tracking, packaging, and shipping. We do it all within a regulatory framework required for medical devices. Here in Vaughan, we're at the center of a MedTech innovation corridor. We have access to great talent, great universities, and great teaching hospitals, fantastic local supply chain networks, and easy access to international markets. All of the ingredients required to make great world-class medical devices.